attorney from Disability Rights. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Ikuta. I am a staff attorney from Disability Rights California. I focus specifically in the area of intellectual and developmental disabilities, and with my focus being on regional center services, avoiding institutionalization, and other areas within that field. So I'm actually going to be doing a presentation today on early start services, specifically early start as it relates to the regional center, as it relates to interagency coordination, and what the process is and how it works and how it would involves you or your child. So if there's any other introductions to be made on this recording, please jump in. If you have any other questions, I have my contact information at the end of this PowerPoint, and also our intake line. If you have any other questions that not just relate to regional center issues, but also issues related to other areas that impact disability, whether that be health or special education or other types or other areas of specialization. So I will, otherwise, if there's no other introductions, I will go ahead. So I wanted to first cover just the context and the background of early intervention, and including the kind of the relevant laws and legislation that have created it. So legislation on early intervention. So early intervention services were created under the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. Specifically, it's under Part C of the IDEA. This is a federal funded program, and including our state. The version that's operated in the state of California is called California Early Start. And this is, again, still federally funded through the IDEA. Part C of the IDEA addresses early intervention services for infants and toddlers with disabilities ages 0 to 3 years old, as well as those children's families. So now that I've given the context and the legal background, I'm going to go more in depth on the Early Start program in this state. So the Early Start Intervention Program. The Early Start Intervention Program provides early intervention services for infants and toddlers and their families. Like I mentioned, it's for children who are younger than age 3 years old. Early intervention services are designed to improve a child's development during the first years of life. Early Start Intervention services are purchased or arranged by regional centers or the local education agencies, which is typically the school districts. So for infants and toddlers who are eligible to receive services from both the regional center and a local school district, the regional center is responsible for providing or purchasing early start services that are beyond the responsibilities of the school district, but only to the extent these services are required by the federal early intervention law. And I'll go more into detail later in this presentation. So I wanted to go into or emphasize the aspect of interagency coordination, because there is more than one agency involved in implementing these early intervention services. So the Early Start program is administered by the Department of Developmental Services, or DDS for short, in collaboration with the California Department of Education, or CDE. So the Department of Developmental Services, DDS, is actually the agency that oversees the regional center system. The CDE, respectively, is the one that handles or deals with the school districts. So with these agencies involved, who is the lead agency? That would be DDS. It is the lead agency for Early Start. It's responsible for the administration and coordination of early intervention services, and it oversees, and as I mentioned before, it is the one that oversees the services through the regional center. So the regional center is going to be heavily involved, typically, with the Early Start intervention program, or Early Start program. Local regional center, so they are the single point of entry to early intervention services. I also want to point out that there is a distinction between what is called early intervention, which is the topic of this presentation, and also versus Head Start. Apologies, there's a typo on the screen. It's supposed to be it's supposed to be Early Start versus Early Head Start. So just to go into more detail on that, Early Head Start serves children from birth to 30. Head Start and Early Start or Early Head Start are preschool and child development programs that serve children in low-income families. So these are comprehensive early education programs that whose focus is to address those from low-income families. But it does include children with disabilities. So again, I'm referring to Early Head Start. It is an educational program. It is through the school district. Early Start, on the other hand, is the California's early intervention service for children and toddlers with special needs and their families. So the Early Head Start is treated as an alternative generic service to Early Start. And I will go into detail what generic services are, but I just wanted to point out the distinction. It does get confusing, Early Head Start versus Early Start, but I hope that this clarifies those services a lot more clearly. So what are the eligibility requirements to the Early Start program? Well, a child, as I mentioned, it's a child who is under age 3 years old, but they must meet at least one of the following criteria. They have a developmental delay, there are established risk conditions, or there is a high risk of developing a developmental disability. And I'm going to go into detail over each of these 3 criteria. So developmental delay, what is that? Well, what that means is that a toddler and infant who has a developmental delay in at least one of the following 5 areas, and I have them listed in this PowerPoint. Number 1, cognitive development. Number 2, communication development. Number 3, physical and motor development, including vision or hearing. Number 4, social or emotional development, and 5, adaptive development. And it's important to note that not only is there a developmental delay, but that this delay, there is a significant difference between the expected level of development for that child's age, expected of a child of that age versus that child's current level of functioning. So what counts as a significant difference between what is expected and what is the actual current level of your child's functioning? Well, a significant difference means a 33% delay in one developmental area before 2 years of age. For a child 2 to 3 years of age, a delay that would be a delay of 50% in one developmental area, or a 33% delay in 2 or more areas is required. So the age for making this eligibility determination is the age of the infant or toddler on the date of his initial referral to the program. I also want to note that this developmental delay is not based on temporary physical disabilities. It is not based on cultural or economic factors. It's not based on what would be perceived as the normal process of acquiring a second language, for instance, or a dialect or some kind of linguistic variance. It really is these 5 criteria listed on this PowerPoint slide. Established risk conditions. So this is basically what this means is that the infant or toddler is diagnosed with a condition that has a high probability of leading to a developmental delay if the delay is not evident at the time of diagnosis. And typical examples that that there is an expected high probability of a developmental delay would be a disability like Down syndrome or cerebral palsy. These are, and also want to note, these established risk conditions are conditions with a, quote, known etiology, aka cause, or conditions with harmful developmental consequences. It's a condition that it is a condition that should be developed by a medical professional, and as I mentioned, known to have a high probability of leading to a developmental delay, as I mentioned, such as Down syndrome or cerebral palsy. But it can be another eligible diagnosis that also would help to indicate that it has a high probability of that delay. And then the other criteria, a high risk of having a developmental disability. So this means a high risk of having a substantial developmental disability due to a combination of medical factors. And these factors are diagnosed by a medical professional, your doctor or some other expert. And these factors can be, for instance, premature birth, low birth weight, seizures, substance exposure by the parent during pregnancy, accident or illness that affects their development. These are just some of the factors that would indicate that there is a high risk of a developmental disability. So how does one get referred for early intervention services, or how does one begin this process of getting early intervention services? So there is a referral process, and this is basically a recommendation that must be made by the parent, doctors, or any other service provider. And there's actually and it's the list of people who can refer one to early intervention can also include others like the hospitals, childcare programs, the school district, public health facilities, any other social agencies and health care providers. So those are also the types of referrals that could sources of referral for early intervention services. The referral, it is a referral to the regional center or the school district, and it can be orally or in writing, although we generally prefer having that in writing. And a referral that's made within 2 working days is usually made within 2 working days after the identification of an infant or toddler who appears to be in need of early intervention services. So let's say, there's a referral that's being made, but how is eligibility determined? How does one make that decision of that child and infant to receive early start intervention services? So regional centers and school districts are responsible for ensuring the application of the evaluation process. And what this means is that there is an assessment process to determine eligibility. This is to evaluate the level of functioning in the areas of cognitive development, physical and motor development, communication development, social or emotional development, and adaptive development. These factors sound familiar because I mentioned them in a previous slide. Those are the areas that are going to be assessed to determine eligibility for early intervention services. These assessments are typically must be conducted in the natural environment if possible. So at the home or or in the setting that's most comfortable for the family or the child. And also eligibility is not determined solely on a single procedure or criterion. And yeah, so that's I could go into more detail about that, but those are the most important aspects to keep in mind when during the evaluation process for early intervention. So just to continue on that, once a referral is made, the regional center or school district must conduct these assessment activities. They then hold a meeting to determine eligibility, and if so, they develop what is called an Individualized Family Service Plan, or IFSP. And this would be done within 45 days of the date the regional center or school district receives the referral. So what is this Individualized Family Service Plan? How does that relate to obtaining services from Early Start? So the IFSP is, as the title states, a service plan. It is developed once eligibility for Early Start services is determined for the child or toddler. It's basically treated like a contract for children ages 0 to 3, and between them and the regional center. And not only that, this IFSP serves as a roadmap, the type of early intervention services that a toddler or infant is to receive. It identifies the services appropriate to meet the needs of your child, ages 0 to 3. And it includes the goals, objectives, and list of early intervention services agreed to by you and the IFSP team to be provided for the child. So this IFSP team includes the following: you, the parents, of course, other family members, if requested, an advocate from outside of the family, if you request it, the service coordinator, typically from the regional center, professionals directly involved who had conducted the evaluations or assessments. So that could be whatever doctors or other experts who did those tests, and those who will provide, and the actual service providers, those who will provide early intervention services for your child or family. And a question that has come up is, does the IFSP meeting include representatives from both the school district and the regional center? And it does. As the law states, both the service coordinators are heavily involved in setting up these IFSP meetings, but also must inform the school district, since the school district is going to be the agency involved in the transitioning after the child after the age of 3, which I will go into more detail later in this presentation. So just to continue on the IFSP process, the team reviewed the IFSP team, including the members that I mentioned in the previous slide, they review this IFSP every 6 months, and they must update it at least once a year. And I went into some detail, but more specifically, your child's IFSP must include the following: your child's present levels of functioning and need, any background relevant family information, major results or outcomes expected to be achieved for your child and the family, the specific early intervention services that the child is to receive, when, where, how much, and how often your child will receive those services, who will pay for the services, the name of the service coordinator, and transition planning after the age for before and after your child turns 3. So I mentioned before the importance of the regional center being, since it is the agency overseen by DDS, which is the lead agency in this early intervention process. So what role does the regional center service coordinator have in this procedure? So the regional center service coordinator coordinates all services across agency lines. They serve as the single point of contact in helping parents obtain the services and assistance they need. They're the ones who develop and review the IFSP. They help to coordinate evaluations and the delivery of available services. They help to seek appropriate services necessary to benefit the development of the child, and they facilitate the development of a transition plan to preschool services, again, when the child reaches right before and after the child reaches the age of 3. So I've gone into just the process of referral and determination. What kind of early start services are there? So this is just a list of the type of services that your child can receive in the Early Start program. That includes assistive technology, family training, counseling and home visits, nursing services, nutrition services, various types of therapy, even sign language and transportation if necessary. These are specific services that are listed under the law, but it's a non-exhaustive list. It can include more if it's a service that can benefit your infant or toddler in their early stages of development. It's also these services can also include respite, although I do want to respite services, although I do want to point out that respite as it is defined when provided by the regional center for those over the age of 3 is not the same definition for respite provided through the Early Start program. I am more than happy to give any additional information as to that clarifies that further, but that is something I wanted to point out. So I mentioned before about generic resources, but what exactly is a generic resource or agency? So in general, regional centers are not permitted to pay for a service or support if it can be provided by another public agency, what is called a generic agency or resource. It is any agency that receives public funds, and they have a legal responsibility to serve all members of the general public. And because the regional centers are only come in because you're expected to go through these generic resources first. That is why regional centers are called the payers of last resort. They are the ones who may come in to pay if these other generic resources are unable to provide a necessary service or support. And I included in the slide examples of generic agencies. Medi-Cal is a generic agency. Your private insurance or healthcare plan, those are generic resources. In-home supportive services from the school from the county, IHSS, that's a generic resource. The Department of Rehabilitation and the school district, those are both generic resources. So I want to point out that now that I've going over the generic resource, I want to go over this kind of transitions into how does private insurance work if you have a child eligible and in the Early Start program. So there are actual rules under the law as it applies to the use of private insurance for those who are in the Early Start program. Regional centers, they can require, they under the law, they are permitted to require parents to use their private insurance to pay for medical services written in their child's IFSP. This may include paying deductibles and co-payments, although this does not include paying for the evaluation and assessment of the infant or toddler. That is a cost that the family is not expected to pay. However, so let's say you have to go through the regional center can require you to go through your own private insurance to pay for a service in your child's IFSP. But what if this process takes time? What if it might delay your child getting services that he or she needs? Again, the importance of getting services to in the early years of development. So under the law, regional centers must allow for the immediate funding of a service if it's necessary. So while the regional center will require you to explore private insurance to fund a service, if it is a necessary support or service your child needs, they must immediately fund it promptly and without delay. So I do want to note that if it is the case that your family is unable to cover even a deductible or a co-payment as part of the private insurance, then that is something to make clear to the regional center, and you can have it where in order for your and because your child cannot be denied services based on the nature of what you can afford with your private insurance, including deductibles or co-payments, that is something that you should hash out with the regional center. They can in fact cover deductibles or co-payments in order to facilitate the private insurance to cover that service and help and allow for your child to get the service they need through their written in their IFSP. So just kind of continuing further on the private insurance, as I mentioned previously, the inability to obtain a decision from your private insurer, whether to approve or deny a claim, must not result in a denial or a delay of services for your child. The family do have to provide health benefit cards, so that could be like relating to private insurance, their Medi-Cal or Medicare, but the lack of private insurance or other benefits should not be used to negatively impact your child's services, and this is something that is outlined under the law. Early intervention services must not be denied or, as I mentioned, they must not be denied or delayed for children of parents who are unable to pay for insurance copays or deductibles. So that should not be a barrier to getting services through early intervention for your child. So I had mentioned before about this whole transition planning, about what happens when your child reaches the age of 3 years old, since the Early Start applies from ages 0 to 3. So how does that transition process work? I'll go into, in the following slides, I'll go into detail on that. So what happens before my child turns 3 years old? So before your child turns, in the Early Start program, turns the age of 3, the regional center will complete a new assessment. If your child has a substantial developmental disability, or continues to have this substantial developmental disability, and will have it after the age of 3, then they can continue to receive services from the regional center. Basically, they become a regional center consumer or client. If not, then your child can no longer get regional center services. So I want to, what I really want to emphasize is that if if your child is in the early start program, they do get services from the regional center for to address any needs for until the age of 3. And the school district can play a part in that as well. But before your child turns the age of 3, the regional center does a new assessment, and based on that assessment, they can continue to provide regional center services for the child after the age of 3 by making that child qualify for regional center services. But if it's determined that they don't have they no longer have the symptoms or diagnosis of a substantial developmental disability that will continue after the age of 3, then the regional center will not be providing services once that child reaches the age of 3. It would be at that point they'd be transitioning completely to the school district. So I just want to make that point that you can be so if you still have an eligible substantial developmental disability, you can become a client of the regional center and get services from the school district. And on top of that, if you disagree with the regional center's decision of you are not eligible any longer for regional center services after the age of 3, you can actually appeal that. You can disagree with the regional center's decision if you believe your child should continue, or that your child should be a client, an official client of the regional center, and you can actually go to hearing on this if you submit a request for that fair hearing. You would have to make a case before an administrative law judge for why your child should qualify for regional center services after the age of 3 based on continuing to have a substantial developmental disability. So I went into detail on that, but I really wanted to emphasize that point. So just to continue on the transition process from the Early Start program. So these are to go into specific timelines. 6 months before your child turns the age of 3, the service coordinator must notify you, the parent, that if the child may be eligible for special education preschool services, and they must notify the school district that there will be an IFSP meeting that discusses transition. This IFSP meeting must be held at least 3 months before your child turns the age of 3. Within 30 days of these notifications to the parents and to the school district, the service coordinator must coordinate the date with a date that the family and the school district can agree upon to have this IFSP meeting to discuss transition. Okay, so this meeting has been agreed upon and scheduled with all the relevant parties. So what actually happens at this IFSP meeting that goes into this transition process? So at this meeting, the team must discuss possible preschool special education services and other transition steps that it may be options for your child, future placements, parent training, other matters related to transition. They can discuss how to prepare your child for changes and who's going to be delivering services and also adjusting to new settings. They're going to transfer that information and records to the school district, and they can identify assessments that should be conducted to determine service needs that your child may have after the age of 3. So transition planning, so I've discussed the role of the service coordinator. What's the role of the school district? So during this time, the school must participate in the transition planning conferences arranged by the regional center, including this IFSP meeting. The school district must ensure that the child experiences a smooth and effective transition to preschool programs. The school district must ensure that an IEP, or individual education plan, has been developed and is being implemented by the child's 3rd birthday. If your child turns 3 over the summer, the IEP team must determine the date when IEP services will begin. So I had mentioned previously about the ability to disagree with decisions by the regional center and how one can file for a fair hearing. Well, I'm going to go. This is good. It's going to go more into detail on that appeals process, as well as the early start complaints. So what is the early start? So what happens if you have an issue, a problem with the services that your child is getting through early start? Or what if it's the case where they're not getting services that they need during the early stages of development? So there is a complaint process specifically for early start. Parents can file a complaint with a DDS. Again, as I mentioned, that's the agency that oversees the regional centers. The complaint must include a description of the violation by the regional center relating to the provision of early intervention services. The DDS must receive that complaint within 1 year of the date of the violation committed by the regional center. Within 60 days after DDS receives that complaint, DDS must investigate and release a written decision on its findings and whatever corrective actions should be taken. And I also include the link of where you can complete your own complaint form and submit it to DDS. But DDS also has forms posted on their website that you can use to fill out such a complaint. So here's the link, and there should be other resources on the DDS website as well relating to early start. So I've talked about the early start complaint process. What about the due hearing? What about the due process hearing? So this is to resolve, in contrast to the complaint process, this is to resolve disagreements between parents and the regional center involving any other matters related to early start. The hearing must be completed within 30 days from since the Office of Admin Hearings receives that hearing request, and the decision is final unless this decision is final, the decision at the due process hearing, but it can be but unless you actually can't appeal that to the superior court of an appropriate jurisdiction. So even a decision at this due process hearing can be appealed, and you just want to be aware of that resource if that's something you want to pursue. I also want to go into native language rights for those families who speak second languages or proficient in other languages. So what is a native language? That is the language the client, your child, or you as the family of the child normally uses or prefers. So under the law, the regional center must provide information in a manner that is, quote, culturally and linguistically appropriate. So that includes if you or your child are deaf, hard of hearing, or blind, or even blind, deaf, hard of hearing, or blind, or some way visually impaired. The regional center must communicate with you and your child using alternative communication services and other means that allow you and your child to get the services they need. For example, So, again, hearing aids, assistive technology, those are the examples of the type of alternative communication services that the regional centers can provide for that. So what needs to be in one's native language? The initial intake meetings, the assessments and evaluations, the IFSP meeting should be in the native language. There should be an interpreter or translation of some kind, the actual IFSP document, and other supports and services that your child receives. So how does one make sure to access their rights to services in their native language? So the regional center must provide you with a copy of the IFSP in your native language. Now, the exception is if DDS determines that it would be an undue hardship for the regional center to do so. But in my experience, that if, for instance, your native language is Spanish and you need your child's IFSP translated to Spanish, that should not be an undue hardship for the regional center to do. You can get a copy of the IFSP in your native language within a reasonable amount of time, again, unless DDS says it's an undue burden to do so. So you may be able, and just a note, you may be able to get the translated IFSP sooner if you remind the regional center that the sooner you get the translated IFSP, the sooner you can consent to services and the sooner your child can receive services. So to continue, just to make some last points on the native language rights, the regional center must state on your child and or the family's native language in the IFSP. And if the regional center does not document the the native language, or they don't provide the IFSP in the native language or the other assessments and evaluations in the native language, that can actually be grounds for filing a complaint. These complaints are referred to as Section 4731 complaints. They are complaints that one can file not only under Early Start, but also if you are a client of the regional center who was older than age 3. But we are more than happy to give more information about the 4731 complaint process and the relevant timelines and how that works. I also want to make a note, given what's going on, it'd be worth mentioning just how Early Start has been impacted with the current health crisis, specifically COVID-19. So what has been the impact of COVID-19 on Early Start program? So DDS has actually released directives or orders to the regional centers. These directives provide guidance and instruction on policy issues and services. And one of those directives is the one the specific number is included on the slide, specifically applying to the extension of Early Start services. So what this directive says is that it provides is that it waives the requirement that early intervention services end at age 3. Remember earlier in this presentation, I talked about how there's a process where there's discussion of transition. So by the time your child turns the age of 3, they are transitioning out of Early Start and getting services from the school district or other agencies. But because of the complications of COVID-19, now that's no longer, at least currently, that is no longer the case. You can, if you're a child and you've reached your 3rd birthday, you can continue to receive Early Start services, especially now with the way school districts have been impacted and the resulting delay in their services, including their special education services. Nonetheless, regional centers, they must continue working with schools to help transition your child to receiving educational services. But if there is an issue with that transition, then be aware that there is this directive that allows your child to continue receiving Early Start while that is being resolved between the school district and the regional center. And the expiration date has been, it's basically been continuously extended. The last time I checked, the current expiration date is now November 12th, 2020, but they can, I would advise checking up on that on DDS's website to see see if they changed their expiration date to some other future date. So that pretty much wraps up my presentation and discussion on the Early Start program and Early Start services. So these, I just want to let everyone know that these are the resources that we have available through DRC's website. Not only, so this includes the special education rights and responsibilities. So our manual that goes into great detail on special education services, how that works, how one gets special education, and it does include a very in-depth discussion on Early Start, as well as services that one can get from the regional center, not just Early Start services, but also how one can qualify for regional center services after the age of 3, what kind of services they can get from the regional center, and how those services can be coordinated with both the regional center and with services from the school district, like special education. I put down the link to go to our website where those publications are posted, and there are Spanish versions available as well. I have also included those links to both the SIR manual and the RULA manual. So I will end this presentation with my contact information. Below is my email address for which one can reach me with any questions relating to this presentation or anything else regarding regional center services. And like I mentioned, if you have a specific regional center issue, problem, or area in which you need assistance with, and not just regional center, any other disability related problem, I have included our intake line. Our intake line allows you to connect with a staff person at DRC where you can discuss your issue and they can help provide information that addresses that problem, or even refer you to an attorney or a practice group who has more information or is able to help you on that particular issue. So again, there's our intake line. There are our hours of availability. We do provide resources and translation for other languages. So if you need translation, or even if you need communication support, if you are hard of hearing or deaf, we also provide those resources. So again, I highly encourage you to access our intake line if you have a disability rights related issue. Okay, but thank you everyone for tuning in this presentation. It's been a real pleasure, and we hope that you are best wishes to everyone. We hope you are doing well, and we want to let you know that DRC will continue to be a resource if that is more than happy to help if you get in touch with us.
Thank you so much, Emily, for presenting tonight, and I want to extend the thanks to Family Soup for having us, and our team, Raymond and Jeannie, for being here. Again, as Emily mentioned, please contact Disability Rights California, was formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. We provide legal services for people with disability. Our number again is 1-800-776-5746. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.